Welcome to hashtag 52 Needs, and this week we're focusing on solitude. And I have with me Lucy Kippist, who is the editor of Flying Solo, a website and community for solo business owners in Australia, and the host of the Flying Solo podcast. So there's probably nobody better qualified to talk about having solitude at work than you. And so a lot of people aim for solitude. They love solitude, or some people don't. But as a solopreneur, obviously, that's a totally different story.
It is a totally different story. And I think what's interesting about that is, I agree with you, that word solitude has it's a very personal term, because your reaction to it is very varied. But in the context of Flying Solo, that's what really attracted me to this brand, to be honest, because these are people that have embraced it from a working perspective. And I think the most interesting thing about that is, when we've surveyed our members who are drawn to the brand, it's like they've started these businesses on their own because they want to believe in their dreams. Like, they want to actually physically back up the dreams in their heads. And that is just a voyage of discovery, a voyage of courageousness, often incredibly hectic, but something that's so incredible to watch and be part of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so sometimes solitude can turn into loneliness. And do you have any tips for how to deal with that?
Yeah, so what was interesting last year during COVID was that our community was like, we've all been working from home for like 10 years by ourselves. And it was interesting to observe their response to that, while the rest of the nation seemed to be like, I'm lonely, for good reason. Their way of dealing with it is interesting because they chose it. And I think that's the essential difference, is when you choose that solitude, you have an entirely different response to that feeling of loneliness. You plan for it, you anticipate it, you're comfortable with that feeling, because it's an uncomfortable sort of feeling. And why Flying Solo started is essentially the antidote to that loneliness, is creating a community around you of people who are like-minded. So even when you are feeling that sense of loneliness, or you've spent an entire week not talking to anyone, really just head down doing your work, it's knowing that you can tap in to the community or speak to someone who is doing what you're doing. It doesn't have to be the same business, but it has to be that same mindset. So I think it's reaching out, and it's also just being okay with it, and sort of understanding that that's a factor of your daily or your weekly working life. A lot of our community used to love talking about how they'd go to cafes on days where they were really struggling with that, because they could still exist in their little work bubble with their laptop, but they'd have that noise of people pass. And now that's not for everyone. I definitely love that too. I like the noise around me, but being able to focus on the task at hand. So that was the other thing, sort of reaching out to a community in a virtual sense, or on the phone, connecting to your greater community, or just going out into the world, listening to a podcast, going to a cafe, trying to conduct your meetings in the park, having some human contact.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is, as I've said, like just being comfortable with it and sort of embracing it. Embracing what that can do for your creativity, because I think what's most remarkable about our community is, regardless of their industry or regardless of their business, they have embraced their own creativity. They're walking every day in their own little bubble of creativity that really only comes from being able to sit with yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can wholeheartedly agree with you, because I am a solopreneur as well. And I actually, people would ask me, what has changed during COVID? And I'd say, not very much. Still the same life I had before, basically. I don't travel, but other than that, I'm by myself. And yes, and again, solitude, I'm one of those typical ambiverts. I love being around people, but I need to recharge by myself. So I value my solitude very, very much. So if I don't have it, I start fraying at the edges. But I also know that there are people who need the noise around them. I think that's why co-working spaces are so popular, because you get to have your own little bubble, but you get to connect with people. You can get up and have a coffee with somebody who's there, and then you can go back into your bubble.
That's right. And you can choose that interaction, right? Whereas when you're in a big office every day, you don't necessarily choose that. You're constantly being interrupted. You're constantly out of your flow. You're not really controlling that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for those of us who don't have the luxury of solitude, let's call it that, because again, you know, I mean, the solopreneur is a certain mindset, and that's not comfortable for everyone. But for people who don't have that, and who may or may not like solitude, you know, I mean, what can we talk about that? Does everybody need solitude?
I don't know that everybody does, because not everybody needs the same thing, right? But I think it's a little bit like medicine to some people. So I think in the experience of a human life, we all need to experience a range of emotions in order to feel, well, you're the expert in this, but in my view, to feel balanced, to be human, to have an experience in the world. So, I mean, my most uncomfortable emotion is probably grief, like sadness. I try and avoid, like loss, I try and avoid that all the time. But having an experience of that and being able to face that, I actually get rewarded each time. So I feel like if you can change your mindset around it and think, yeah, okay, so you don't want to spend a lot of time on your own, but what about just like tasting a little bit of it and doing it in a way that doesn't feel so confronting at first, like maybe reading a book.
You may not want to go into solitude to explore your grief. You know, that was probably like saying, I'm going to learn to climb a mountain, and I think I'm going to start with Mount Everest.
Yes.
but maybe just going and, as you said, read a book, and maybe close the door and really say to people, I'm not available. Because that for some people can be really hard, you know, to say, I'm making myself unavailable here right now because I want to be by myself. Because we have this thing that we need to be available to people at all times. You know, I mean, the way we are in community, the way the self operates best in community is by losing the self, by being selfless, right?
That's right.
And solitude and saying, I need my solitude could easily be perceived as being selfish.
Absolutely. That's very true.
But when you're working and you're surrounded by people all the time, as you said, that could be a really great balance, especially for creativity and, you know, all of those things that you mentioned before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, getting your head around the idea that while something isn't necessarily right for you, for the other person it is, and being able to have that conversation with someone who's actually quite different to you in that way, to sort of see to see what they're getting out of it and seeing what you can potentially get out of it. I don't even know if that makes sense, but hopefully it does.
Well, we both agree that solitude is not something that we are encouraged to have.
Yes.
I mean, like, do you really need that alone time? It has to be generally combined, especially when when we're really busy at work. We have to somehow justify it and combine it with a useful activity. You know, like I go for a walk and I listen to a podcast because I can't fit it in because I'm so busy at work. Or I don't know. Give me another example of what we would do if we, you know.
Well, I'm just thinking one of the big bugbears in our community, which goes back to what you were saying before, is actually being able to say no to people and the difficulty of that. And I think in the context of what you're saying there, you feel like you have to have a reason to say no, because otherwise you're a solopreneur, you're supposed to be growing a business. If you say no to a client, what's that saying? Is that saying that you don't want any more work? No, it's not. It's saying at the moment, or for whatever reason, that client, that piece of work, that's not going to fit with you right now. And we run lots of articles on this all the time where people struggle with coming up with the excuse for that. I want to say no, but how do I say it?
But that's part of this whole thing of self-care. You know, like self-care is often branded as, or brandished around as, go to the spa, have a lovely day at the spa, or, you know, things like that. That's not self-care.
No.
Solitude solitude is self-care.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And it doesn't have to be justified. It's something where I go, no, I need some solitude. I need some me time. I need some space right now. And I don't need to go and get a massage or again, or that purpose-driven self-care.
Yes.
You know, solitude can be boring, I think.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. We need to get bored sometimes to make room for space for new ideas and, you know, sorting things out in our mind.
Absolutely.
Processing emotions.
Yeah. And I noticed that I have 2 young boys, and I notice that with them when they say, Mum, we're bored, and I don't give them anything to do. I'm just like, go off. And obviously there's a lot of whinging, there's a lot of resistance. And then within 20 minutes, they're there and they've created something and they're playing with that quietly and they're just completely in their own heads.
Yeah.
And I think the same, you know, that doesn't change as an adult. I think we have to take lessons from children in that way, even when we're working. It's like, and I think solitude can be a gift when you're really stuck on something with work too. When you're like, I keep trying to jam this thing and I can't, you know, I can't write it or I can't solve the problem, but I'm just going to keep going because if I don't, that means that I'm not dedicated to my work and that means I'm, you know, everything's falling apart and all that negative self-talk. Where actually if you went, you know what, why don't you just go for a walk around the block?
Yeah. And again, that's a different solitude from working alone. Because you could easily say, but you have solitude, you're working by yourself, you're a solopreneur, right? But it's not the same as saying, I just want to be by myself and in my space right now.
That's right. That's right. That is true. Yeah. But yeah. So I guess it's making that okay for yourself and making even just having a little list of things that have worked for you in the past. A favorite thing I heard from one of my favorite authors, Maggie Alderson, years ago, she said whenever she went on holiday, when she came back, she'd write down on a piece of paper what she packed because she just had this terrible relationship with packing. And I really related because I have the same thing. It's either overpack or underpack. So she had all these little notes, and that concept really stuck with me in the concept, in the idea of when you're trying to be comfortable with something that you really haven't had a good relationship with in the past, when you think of when you have an experience where you've done it and it worked and sort of you reflect on, oh, I took myself out for lunch that time when my client didn't turn up and I accidentally was there and I really enjoyed, why did I enjoy that?
Yeah.
Hang on a second, did I just have some time to myself that I enjoyed that I would never seek out by myself? So it's reflecting on those things at the end of the week. Where did I find some good solitude and what did I get out of it? And then how can I plan to have that?
Yeah. Well, let me put it this way. In times of social networks where everything is totally connected 24/7 and we're accounted for at any given moment, you know, where it's like, now this is where I'm having my lunch, this is where I spend my afternoon, this is what I'm doing. Now, doing solitude and without reporting to anybody, again, that could be also challenging.
Yes.
So going and saying, I'm having lunch by myself and I'm not telling anybody about it. I'm just going to enjoy myself. Yeah, that could be interesting.
That could be
especially when you fit it into a schedule, when you're busy working and then going, I'm not rushing back into the office and I'm not going to get more work done because I now have that time available, and saying, you know what? And that happened to me yesterday. I had one of those time difference issues with one of my clients. I thought it was one time, she thought it was another time. So and then we had all these wonderful technology issues. And so I said, you know what? Let's just move it to next week. Hopefully the internet will have sorted itself out by then, because we both had problems. It was one of those things. And I went, okay, now I have half an hour. What am I going to do? I went for a little walk. You know, it was like, why should I rush back? I've been sitting here all day. And that is something, again, it's taking the opportunity to make use of it. I could have made phone calls. I could have done more, you know, there were all sorts of options. And I went, I've got another client and I've got a Facebook Live panel and I've got all sorts of other things. No, I'm just going to go for a little walk with my umbrella in the rain.
Yes, so good. Which would have brought your energy to such a different place in the rest of the things that you had in the afternoon. So I guess what the important thing there is to make that an option. Like that's actually an option in the list of, I'm going to do the vacuuming, or I'm going to hang out the washing, or I'm going to talk to someone on the phone, or I'm going to get through that article that I was supposed to write. It's like, oh, I might do nothing. And make that actually an option. Yeah.
Well, that's a good place to stop, isn't it?
Yes.
An option to not do anything. Thank you so much, Lucy. That was wonderful. So I hope we've given everybody some idea of what solitude is and all the different dimensions it has. And please embrace solitude. It's really important for us. And thank you, Lucy. And I'll see everybody next week.
Thank you, Angela. Lovely to be here.